Good morning and welcome to all. I am very happy to, be hosting this discussion on the feed demand of today. And I will initially, like to give little bit of background of the whole concept of this 1 hour discussion, why I thought of it and what is expected of it. Then, of course, briefly, I'll introduce each of our speakers, and for next 1 hour we'll go on with the discussion in the discussion mode about the feed demand of India. Basically, I was part of two conferences in last few days. One was held by CLAFMA, which is the Feed Manufacturers Association, and other was held by the SOPA, that is Soybean Processors Association. And it was like two extremely opposite kind of environment that both the in events had. And at that time I realized that after listening to many speakers, after talking to many people, what came across is that very few people have idea about what is the feed requirement of India, of all the industry, which is poultry, cattle, aqua. And there is no single platform that actually gives a macro view on various feed requirements that we have, and hence no kind of planning is really possible. Everybody is now, I think, almost familiar with the soybean meal fiasco last season. All of us know that soybean prices touched 10,000 record levels. Soybean meal prices touched 1 lakh, and the meal industry was under a lot of pressure, and they asked the government to allow the imports. Incidentally, the discussions took so long that the imports were finally allowed at the time of harvest. That resulted in prices of soybean collapsing. There was a lot of heartburn from farmers because they were expecting higher prices, though prices are still higher, but they've corrected almost 50% from their higher levels. So this is been the main background of the current talk. I think I would like to point out to our speakers couple of other factors that I believe will be affecting the whole feed industry, the agri industry in days to come. All of us know that because of COVID, the liquidity has increased tremendously, not only in India, but also globally. Because of that, prices globally are going up. Usually we believe, being an agro analyst, I have been saying all along that price is the incentive for production, and that is now coming under question mark because of the climate crisis. That though prices are high, but there are very much chances that the production is not able to respond to the higher prices. So in that case, how does the supply scenario work? While globally that is true, in India everybody believes that productivity is still low and there is higher chances of productivity increases, and that's why the higher prices could result in higher production. But because of the open market phenomena that we live in, higher prices, higher production, higher productivity may not really result in lower prices because of the export and imports that are allowed. So, the situation is becoming very dynamic, and how do we maneuver in this situation? The best way to do is, more accurately estimate the demand and supply, maybe diversify and localize the solution of feed are some of the things that, I'm able to think. But our esteemed guest today, I think, will be able to help us in have a better view on this whole scenario and how we can actually maneuver this whole into this whole situation. I would like to introduce each of our guests. Firstly, I would like to welcome so interestingly, while planning this discussion, we came across with each of us individually, and we had this discussion. Mr. Victor Suresh has had the PhD in aquaculture, and he's had degree in fisheries science. He started his professional career in aqua feed industry and in Ralston Purnia International in 1996. For 25 years, he's been involved in developing product strategies and feed formulation. And the client, he's into consulting and the United Research, and mostly located in Asia, and produce feed for warmer fin fish and marine shrimps. In India, he's technical director of Growell Feeds. He's also involved in Bentoli, an international feed additive manufacturer, for a very long time. He's currently the president of Society of Aqua Professional and the largest aquaculture association in India. I started with aqua because aqua has been the very so to say mystic sector as such, and people are not very familiar with the feed requirement. Only the specialized people are into it. Then we have Mr. Akhil Arora. He is the head procurement and distribution of Sugna Foods. Everybody's heard of Sugna, and it's a very reputed company into the feed sector. And he also, before Sugna, he was the controller of raw material procurement in Allied Renders and Distillers Private Limited. And he's had a very long career that included working in PepsiCo, working in ITC. And I'm very sure that, he will be able to help us a greater view into the feed industry. I would also like to introduce our third esteemed guest, who's Dr. Suyash Vardhan. He's a dairy professional and been serving dairy industry for over 2 decades. He's specialized in animal nutrition, animal reproduction. He's completed his graduation with West Bengal University of Animal and Fisheries Sciences, Kolkata, and post-graduation from University of Agriculture Sciences in Bangalore. He's an alumni of K-Satat, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong, University in Thailand, and completed the feed mill efficiency program. He's worked in organizations like Tetragon, Provimi, and Cargill, USA, etc. And I'm very sure that he'll be able to throw a lot of light on how the whole cattle feed, industry and the compositions work for each of agriculture commodity. Before now starting the discussion, the COVID is the white elephant in the room, and we cannot really ignore that elephant. Though there are a lot of talk about, when you listen to the business analysis, a lot of people are saying that there is a revenge consumption that's happening. Like, the consumption has gone up so sharply that it's reached the pre-COVID level. But that is about the probably discretionary consumption or the consumption routine consumption. We will look at, feed industry, the products of feed industry, which is, milk, cattle, meat, aqua, marine, as well as poultry in this light, and try and see, if you can throw light on how each industry is pre-COVID, post-COVID, and the going forward in the new COVID normal world. So maybe we can start with Akhilji. Akhilji, if you can throw some light on this, and we'll take each of the industry separately in brief. So we'll go into a question answer mode, take one after another question separately. And so that, the more brief but accurate responses, the larger questions will be able to cover. But I do insist that you cover everything that you have to cover. Akhilji.
Yeah, hi, good morning all. So yeah, it has been a very turbulent time in the poultry feed industry due to the COVID. We had almost a washout in the first quarter of 2020 and some impact in 2021 as well. But yeah, now what we are foreseeing around high single-digit growth in the poultry market in terms of consumption demand. So accordingly, the feed demand is also going up. So it is not that it is dependent on a particular state or a single region of a country. It's all across India. We are seeing that kind of a growth. We are also doing our expansion in terms of setting up the plants and all, so that we are able to meet the consumer demand as well as our own internal requirement.
Akhilji, when we were kind of designing this whole discussion, there was one thing that kept coming to our mind, that the requirement of protein has come out very prominently in this post-COVID time, where doctors and they erstwhile vegetarians have also started eating egg and chicken to that extent, and those who are occasional eaters have kind of become more regular eater of egg and chicken. So do you think that the going forward, the pace of growth into demand of these products will be much higher than the recent 3 to 4 years compound average growth rate?
Right, right. So yeah, that's what I said. We are forcing high single digit growth. So in terms of protein requirement, yeah, because it is a part of the feed. So as a formula, it is consistent between 28% to 32%. In that range, it is there in our poultry feed. And the majorly as a poultry feed industry, we would like to consume soya meat. And depending on the cost matrix and in terms of availability matrix, we keep changing to the alternate sources as well, which we have done in the past.
Yeah. So we'll come to the individual commodity specific demand in our next round. So Yashi, you would maybe like throw some light on the COVID related question, which is pre-COVID, post-COVID, and going forward. Is there any particular change in pattern that you see?
Good morning, everyone. Prerna, as you were mentioning very correctly regarding protein demand. So I would be addressing later on about for the feed requirement of protein. But overall, if you look at globally, protein demand is becoming much. And pre-COVID, if you look at, we were not looking into diet specifics. But post-COVID realization is that if something can protect you, that is your immunity. So that's the reason that people started consuming it. You are very correct on that. And the sector which I belong in milk, it had always been in demand. In Asia Pacific, if I look at 5 years back, milk was not, or you can say dairy was not in center stage. Gradually, it is moving in. We are seeing in different geographies, like in Japan or Korea, Australia, New Zealand had been always dairy producing countries. And if you look at New Zealand, Fonterra had been always in forefront for milk production and exporting economy in that. Specifically, if you look at South Asia, in South Asia, India is the largest producer, and means our prediction is that milk is going to become more and more in demand, specifically milk protein. And going forward, post-COVID, then certainly there will be good demand of milk and milk products, which is, I think consumption is going to increase further, and everything will be linked to it. In order to produce milk, whatever is required, be it feed, forage, or anything, that will be in demand.
Okay, great. That is very insightful. Now we can turn to aqua sector, and Dr. Victor, maybe you want to throw some light in this particular context. I think you are on mute.
Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, aqua, when you look at aqua, you need to recognize there are two major sectors within it. One is fish and another one is shrimp. And these are very different because fish is basically to the domestic market and shrimp is mainly to the export market. So it goes out of India. And the stories are a little different. In the case of fish, the impact of COVID was largely on the logistics. There was like market closures. And also we need to recognize that Andhra Pradesh is the biggest producing state in case of both shrimp and fish. They are the #1 state in India. But if you look at the market, the biggest markets are in West Bengal is the biggest market for fish. So there needs to be a road transportation. And then, West Bengal market need to be open, to receive the Andhra Pradesh fish. So there were a lot of disruptions that happened during the early part of the COVID-19 lockdown in 2020. Again, during the second wave, we saw the same kind of issue. that was happening. So there were some, market disturbances, that resulted in the fish price actually going down as a result of it. Although there was demand, in many markets, and there was this picture in the newspaper showing Chennai market, how, a fishing, a landing center in Chennai being swamped by people in the middle of the lockdown to buy fish. So there was demand, but the supplies were disrupted, and there was a problem because of that. Now, shrimp is a different thing. Shrimp also got disrupted because shrimp depends on factories working, because shrimp needs to be processed in order to be exported. So there were physical lockdowns of the processing plants and so forth in the beginning of the lockdown, and then eventually it got sorted out. The other big shock was the exponential increase in the container prices. The reefer containers in which the frozen food are transported went from anywhere, somewhere close to $4,000 per container to almost $16,000-$17,000, 4 times higher in terms of the freight cost. And in spite of that, the global demand for proteins increased. And then particularly, like everybody was facing their own supply issues, the African swine fever, for example, in some of the markets. And in other markets, you had problem, also with the processing plant. For example, the US had a lot of problems with the closing down of poultry processing plant. So there was a shortage of protein. And so there was a demand for, actually, wherever you get good protein, there was a demand. And so our exports to the US actually increased. We had a higher, although we had some problem with the next biggest market is China, and then China.
We've lost your voice. Suresh.
Can you hear me now?
Now.
Okay.
Can you just repeat after next biggest market is China? We lost you.
Yeah. So China, the problem was, they were restricting if the coronavirus is found on the packaging, and then they were saying, oh, you cannot accept that. So there were some problems, related to shipment to China. But then, the overall trend is that, the imports have increased. In fact, we have done a record export so far from India this year. So it's been good. There are some disturbances in the production. Those are not the matter at this time. But in terms of demand, post-COVID has been really good for the shrimp industry. So that's what I would say.
Thanks. You point out a few very important factors that needs to be discussed, but maybe some other time, because this is not the platform, like the disruption of value chain, disruption of rate, disruption of, the whole globalization concept was cheapest to produce, highest to consume. And, you connect the dots and move goods from one place to another. And so, that whole model is coming under question. Also, you brought out the point that, the demand has increased quite dramatically for protein, but supply is somewhere else. So if it's not meeting, even at higher prices, people are, wanting to consume. Also, the fact that just like in wartime, many people, compare this as wartime, whereby, supply gets disrupted. But the demand comes back much faster, causing the inflation and other things. So it remains to be seen if we are in that era or not. But I just wanted to highlight these points that maybe can be discussed into some other discussion forum. I would like to now, switch to India specific thing, in which I won't. Again, India is as big as a continent, Here also we produce at one place, we consume at another place, and then you have to transport things and all. So I would like to, identify the pockets of consumption, because we are focusing consumption. Production pockets, anyway, all of us know. And what kind of percentage of total that pocket is. So say poultry industry is located in Namakkal, maybe Hyderabad. The new zone that has emerged in recent years is Punjab, Haryana. So, these pockets, chunks, if we can identify for each of thing, and the poultry requirement, percentage share in total poultry requirement in that region. Then maybe we can break down it to what are the options available for that particular region for the feed. So should we start with Akhilji?
Yeah. So yeah, broadly as Sugna Foods is an all India company, we are present in almost 18 states across India, starting from Tamil Nadu till the northeast of Assam. So right now, considering that current business trend, we are around 35% plus our total business share is in the south. That is the kind of demand. I think industry is also following the similar trend. And around 20
South,
25%.
can you bifurcate into extreme south, that is Tamil Nadu and Andhra Telangana?
Right. So if you talk like that, so our biggest market would be in terms of is going to be Tamil Nadu, then going to be Karnataka, then Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, like that. So the biggest would be Tamil Nadu here. Going towards east, yeah. So the West Bengal is the biggest market there. Then in east, broadly, it is around 25% demand share. It is there in the east. So similarly, the highest demand is there in the West Bengal, then followed by smaller states like Orissa and all, and Assam. So put together, around 60% market is between south and west. Then you have 15-20% each settled in west and north.
Okay, that's quite interesting. Will you be able to put a number also as to, according to you, because I do understand that the industry is very unorganized and fragmented, but do you have any estimates on what kind of poultry sizes, like you have broilers and layers and egg consumption, maybe production, something like that?
So yeah, in terms of let's talk the broiler placement, which is our major forte. That's a business. In terms of broiler placements, our weekly would be around 1 crore is a placement we have in the broiler segment, divided into similar ratio, which I told earlier. And we command almost 10% market share in this. Being so much fragmented, still we are the number one in the broiler segment. So put together, yeah, industry placement would be around 10 crore chicks every week.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. Maybe we can turn to Suyash now. If you can kind of define regional wise bifurcation and probably the size, because it's could be slightly more organized because it's so visible and it's so I don't know, big or something like that.
Thank you very much. More organized, but unfortunately, dairy industry is particularly in India.
Can you be a little louder?
So I would like to address this. Yeah, sure. I would like to address it from 2 points. One from production, and second with the feed production. That how it is connected with. If you look at production wise, I need to refer government figures here because there is huge variance in the actual figures. So basically, as per last report of Government of India, milk production roughly 44% contribution comes from north and northern states. You can look into forefront is UP, Rajasthan, Punjab, Haryana, and Delhi NCR also. You can take into it. From the contribution of Uttarakhand, Himachal, and Jammu and Kashmir is quite little in that. Further, if you look at second pocket is with 24-25% contribution from west, where Gujarat, Maharashtra, and you can take central region also. Then there is contribution of south, which is roughly around 21%. And especially if you look at healthy development has happened of late in Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu is also catching up very fast into it. And means east has the least contribution on it, roughly around 11% of the milk. Now coming, these are the producing production centers, what I'm talking about. Now, if you look at the feed demand or feed production, so last only reference data which is available is 2014 CLAFMA data. but somehow we don't agree with it. Reason is being that is specifically for the club for members data. And if you look at, we try to connect it with the milk production center, because if milk is produced in some particular location and feed being the freight intensive commodity, so it cannot ship from far away region. So exception to that, if I refer that particular data, so 17% feed production is in north, and roughly 48% contribution is of west. Whereas I think the data has been taken from Godrej, and Godrej is not regional organization, it's pan-India. So I think that is the reason that could have, number has gone up. So feed production, referring the CLUFMA data, it's 17% from north, 48% is from west, and roughly contribution is 30% from south, and rest is from east. East is quite low, around 4 to 5% of the feed production.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Victor, you would like to address the similar question as to where the regional concentration is, and probably the size of the products, aqua products.
Kind of hard to give the sizes, because largely because we do not have an official data on fish production, and we have an idea of the consumption, but the actual production number, if you look at it, there is no good data, including from the government. Government is giving a very high number, but I don't think the production is that high. When I count it all, it's still coming to about 20 lakh tons. Whereas the government says, even the state of Andhra Pradesh is producing 40 lakh tons. So, there is a disparity in the numbers. So I don't want to give
40 lakh tons of
40 lakh tons of fish and shrimp. And so it's a little bit higher, so there is some problem in our statistics. And but if you look at it, no doubt that Andhra Pradesh is the biggest producer. And particularly 3 districts in Andhra Pradesh account for probably 1/3 of India's production. This is the Godavari districts, East Godavari, West Godavari, and Krishna. Together they account for a bulk of the production. Now the consumption. Now Andhra again says that we produce 40 lakh tons. We send out 20 lakh tons to other states. These are primarily, like I said, West Bengal is the #1. So if you look at the consumption. Culturally, the states that have been consuming fish, are the top consumers. And so obviously the answer is West Bengal. Kerala is another higher consumer, and they are catching up on production. But now this is on the per capita basis. So population of Kerala is not very high. Their population density is high, but their population as it's not a big state. But the consumption is significant. And then if you look at all the major metros, again, these are the major, all major metros, whether it is Mumbai or Hyderabad or Bangalore or Chennai or Delhi, you have high consumption of fish in those places. And naturally, the western states of Gujarat, Rajasthan, would be the low consumers of it. But we see now North is the one that's beginning to grow, and we see that almost all the one on the eastern part, West Bengal, Odisha, you have Chhattisgarh, Bihar, Eastern UP, they are all registering an increase in production. So which means that, that the consumption is probably localized there. And so they are sort of displacing and reducing the price of fish that's coming from Andhra. So now Andhra needs to refocus its aquaculture, probably look at different species, or have the Andhra people consume more fish, that's a sort of, so for a high producing state like Andhra, the consumption is very low. So so far it was okay because they were able to send it out. Now they're being, all these states that were previously importing are now locally producing. So that's the change that we are seeing in India when it comes to regional distribution.
So there is a small question. I believe prawn is something which gets 80% of it gets exported.
More than 80%.
Is what Yeah.
more than 80%. Yeah.
And so
Probably
where is
the
that
domestic
industry-
consumption. Yeah, the domestic
Where is
consumption.
that industry located?
I mean, production or consumption?
Production.
Production is, like I said, Andhra Pradesh. Andhra Pradesh is the
Acha.
number.
Prawn also. Prawn specific.
Prawn also, yeah, they are the number one.
Acha.
And number two is like Odisha, West Bengal, would be the number two. Gujarat used to be very strong, you know, and now in the recent years, you know, they're not doing as good as they used to. But Gujarat used to be a big state, and then all others are, you know, even Tamil Nadu is not that big. But really, Andhra, Odisha, West Bengal, then Gujarat, you know, this would be the top two.
Considering that, you know, most of our borders are surrounded by sea, I think the aqua still remains in sort of.
It is there, but it's also picking up in Punjab, Haryana, you know, so
Acha. Right.
there are a lot of saline lands are there, and farmers are converting those lands into shrimp farms.
I think now we can switch to the ingredient part of it, in the sense that we have identified, like you said, that Andhra Pradesh claims that they are supplying the feed majority of it, and they are exporting also. So if we can kind of, you know, kind of prioritize the feed for protein requirement, as well as like Suyaji pointed out to me, that it's not carbohydrate, it's the energy. You should talk in terms of energy. So both from the protein requirement, if we can, you know, prioritize ingredients that is mostly used by the industry. And also I will combine with this a question that especially when soybean meal kind of got over last season, and I believe even cotton seed oil cake also kind of got over last year abruptly. Like, you know, people were not able to fathom as to where the cotton DOC has gone. So during both these times, like, you know, when an ingredient, the main ingredient is at short, what is it that is used as, you know, next best, and what are the options that are available for the feed users that they can use, both from the energy angle as well as from the protein angle? I think we can reverse the order. We can start with Victor. Maybe he can mention the aqua feed requirement from the ingredients point of view.
It's a little bit of a complex story because, like I said, you know, we have two stories. You know, one is the shrimp and the other one is the fish. Again, you know, when it comes to the ingredients, it becomes very complex and very, very different. You know, the shrimp is basically, I would say, about 1/3, you know, roughly 1/3 fish and other marine protein ingredients, and about 1/3, you know, even more than 1/3 of soya, and then, you know, you have roughly about, you know, 1/4 to 1/3 grains. And the grains, you know, primarily wheat is the primary grain in the, you know, used in shrimp. So this
wheat,
is,
did you say wheat?
yeah, wheat.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, wheat would be the biggest grain. So so this is roughly the distribution. It's fairly simple, you know, everybody follows almost the same template for making the feed, and there are, you know, certain little variations. And if you look at the oils, we use soy lecithin, you know, so that's the big consuming, you know, in the oil. Soy lecithin can be anywhere 2 to 3% or 2 to 2.5% in the feed. So it's quite a large consumption of oil. Fish oil, probably about 1%, maybe somebody will be using 2%, you know, so that's the range. So these are the primary oils that oils and fats that go into the shrimp feed. Like I said, it's very simple and pretty straightforward. And then when you look at the fish feed, it becomes very, very complex. First of all, not all the fish in India are fed with the manufactured feeds. Okay, as a matter of fact, you know, the manufactured feed for fish is a very, very young industry. You know, we started doing that only like 15 years ago, and so it's a new practice. What happened till then was that, you know, fish farmers were basically mixing their own feed. and they would buy, and it's still practice, it's about 80% rice bran, de-oiled rice bran, and then they mix it with cottonseed or groundnut oil cake, and then give it to the fish. So as the ingredient, somebody will just broadcast on the pond, or they would put it into a bag, throw it into the water, and that's the way fish used to be fed. And then we started going into the feed manufacturing, and there was explosive growth in this sector. And so we suddenly saw that there was a takeoff. But today, if you look at it, farmers have not fully shifted to the manufactured feed. There is still, I would say, more than what we use as manufactured feed. My count is, probably 11 lakh tons of, fish feed being produced, about maybe 15, maybe even 20 lakh tons of ingredients being used. This is largely because the FCR, when it comes to using the feeds, throwing ingredients into the water, is very, very high. Naturally, the fish don't get to eat everything. So you have an FCR of maybe conservatively 3, maybe 3.5. And so the amount of ingredients that you need for this sector is extremely high. And so that sort of, but again, this is primarily grain byproducts, or the ones that are being used. I don't know if you want me to go into specific ingredients, but again, in the fish feed, grain byproducts, whether you are on the manufactured side or, the farmers are using, in the manufactured feed, about 40% is grain byproducts. You're looking at DORB, you will be looking at some of the corn DDGS, things like that, that are being used in, for the, as the grain byproduct. And the protein ingredients are, something close to about maybe 30% or so. But this can come from a variety of ingredients because the fish are very tolerant of a lot of the plant proteins and the fibrous ingredients and so forth. So there is some soya, but during this recent soya crisis, I think all the soya was taken out, and they were replaced. Traditionally, there was some say mustard seed cake, some rapeseed meal. They were used. Cottonseed was used. Groundnut oil cake was used, and so even some of the rendered MBM. Now there is some poultry meal that is becoming available. All of them are coming into, completely remove soybean from the feed because there is a pressure on the price of the product. So naturally, I mean, now even at the lower prices today, soybean meal will not be taken. Maybe it will go into some of the starter feeds and so forth, but not in the main grow finisher stages. It will not be used. So that's the situation in India at the moment. And then as far as the grains are concerned, the grains can be anything. I mean, it can be broken rice. I would say broken rice probably the number one, and then but there is also maize, and there's some bajra, and wheat is also being used, but most likely it's either maize and broken rice. Bajra is very seasonal; it comes and goes. So that's the nature of it. And then because you're extruding the feed, you need to have at least 18 to 20% grains in the feed. And even when some of the feeds are being pelleted, so my estimate is that maybe 8 lakh tons are being extruded. About I don't think it's 3. I think it's more like 1 or 2 lakh tons of feeds being pelleted. This is just in the south. And now, if you include the north, there is another 3 lakh tons coming from there. So totally about 11 lakh tons. And then, so in all these feeds, the grains are important because the feeds need to be stable underwater. So it's not like the chicken feed or ruminant feed where water stability is not that critical. But for us, the water being stable in water is very important. So you need to add, and that's the reason why the feed manufacturers have also embraced extrusion technology. And so the need for the grains is largely to provide that stability in the feed more than anything. Fats are concerned, there is some vegetable oil, some fish oil being top coated in these feeds, very little, probably 1% being coated. So it's not a major part of it. But like I said, the fibrous plant protein byproducts, grain byproducts, are the number one ingredient that are being used in the fish feed industry.
Yeah, thanks. I think that was very insightful. Akhilji was listening very, you kind of, okay, let me understand it better. So let's turn to Akhilji. You can also throw light on in this regard. Of course, you have, I think, a bird eye view of all the sectors, but I would like you to focus more on the poultry sector.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, in case of poultry, broadly, what we say around 60 to 65% grain is used in the feed, and as in the case of aqua, but yeah, in case of poultry, we use more of a maize there as a first priority. But now alternate grains are also available, and we use that as well. That is coming, bajra and broken rice. Then last is a wheat, which is being used, but the first priority is to maize, then followed by bajra and then broken rice. Considering on the protein side, yeah, we get certain protein content from some grains also. But yeah, considering the protein products, soya meal and other alternate proteins, yeah, the usage is between 20, depending on the age of the bird, it varies. But yeah, on average, it is 28 to 30% is the average meal requirement in a per ton of a feed that way. And yeah, we use oil. Yeah, in case of oil, yeah, we prefer more of a rice bran oil, and we use alternate sources as well, like mutton tallow oil, that also being used depending on the availability. And so yeah, other oils, yeah, has a different benefits or the kind of nutrition value. The preference is more of to rice bran oil and your mutton tallow oil. Broadly, it is majorly 3 ingredients which are there. Then we have other norms. These are the 3 categories.
Yeah. Thanks. Let me now turn to Suyashi. Personally, I've had this question that, cattle tend to have taste, and though people have been, discussing that COC and rape meal kind of rape oil cake is like, substitutable, and there are also talks about farmers. I mean, the cattle usually have the taste, and they are not easily, they don't switch. So that's my personal question that I wanted to know about. And of course, I like you to throw light on overall feed ingredients for the cattle feed sector.
I think in that sense, we are a little bit fortunate than Akhil and Suresh on this, because there are many combinations which can be used in dairy feeds. And over the period of time, we have done basically as an organization also globally, we have done that what could have been the ingredient map for substitution, and effectively we are able to do it. Coming to Indian scenario, that if we look at in cattle, there are categorization. It is not a blanket kind of, because the still major part of dairy diet is forage, and cattle feed compound already we are at very higher level as far as global average is concerned. But again, if you look at energy sources, these are very common. Means across the species, there is no debate about it. That maize is one of the ingredients for energy. And for ruminants, it becomes important because of its nature of release of energy, which happens in rumen. So maize, wheat, bajra, broken rice, these are the energy ingredients which are being largely used. Then there are fat products. Basically in dairy, you cannot use oils, free oils. So protected fat you need to use. And simultaneously, you can also use, in young animals, you have that liberty to use oil as an energy source. And then there are certain feed supplements also which can partly can contribute to the energy. When it comes to protein, the major had been always in north rapeseed meal or mustard meal, you can say. Then soy meal was basically there was hit actually with the soybean meal crisis. The major hit happened to the premium feed manufacturers, those who were for the high yielders they were making because of amino acid profile it was required. They faced huge challenge. As a substitute, if I look at then variety of protein ingredients which we can use in dairy feed. Apart from rapeseed meal, you can use soy meal if it is not. Earlier also it was not used much. Then other ingredients can become peanut meal or groundnut, you can say, rice or corn DDGS. Then there is also guar meal, which is if economically it's available. So it's available in roasted and normal form also. Then there are also industrial byproducts you can use. And could be blend of energy and protein also. So there is flexibility. Now I would like to actually bring a very important fact here that if you look at from industry perspective, India is getting a basically challenge. And that challenge is in terms of that globally, if I refer IFCN data of 2021, recently they have released it, that as far as global average is concerned, Indian milk price has reduced by 7%. And feed price has gone up by 18%. So basically, if you look at in open world, which you were saying that now economy is getting open and we are placed into global competition also. So in that scenario, if competitiveness has not been arrived, then there will be certainly challenges, as you know, that there are surplus countries, and specifically as I look after means I contribute to my Asia Pacific team as well as global team. So we kind of always look into the details. And that is the reason as an organization, what we are contributing, we are developing a lot of digital technologies to be deployed at field level. So we have developed a Nutriopt on-site advisor, which is a handhold NIR. So you can map ingredients at trading center and as well as at feed mill level. Then Mr. Victor Suresh was mentioning about usage of mustard meal or cottonseed meal by the farmers. The greater challenge which we are seeing is about the mycotoxin risks. So mycotoxin contamination, even there was elation in the industry for the import of soy meal, which was allowed by Government of India. But as far as I interacted with some of our customers and realized that soy meal which has been imported was spiked with mycotoxins, which was very unusual. So these kind of things I think will keep on coming into center stage. And one thing is for sure for feed mill industry, I think we need to really look into the safety angle also now.
Okay. That was quite insightful. I would like to kind of throw this question at each of the panelists that largely we are feed self-sufficient as of now. Like we are, in fact, we are surplus to some extent because corn we are exporting. We are also exporting wheat. We are also exporting soya meal. In fact, soya meal crisis accentuated only because in the first 3 months there was very huge export parity and we exported and we ended up falling short of it towards the end of the season. But if had that export not happened, then probably the crisis would not have been as severe as it was last season. And same holds true for paddy, like we have sufficient for DORP and other things. So I want to ask each one of you that how soon, also the fact remains that the pace of rate of growth of consumption is much higher than rate of growth of the productivity of each of these products. And so how soon do you think that each of your sector will need to get into the net import kind of a situation for the feed ingredients? Akhilji, you want to start, especially in context of, because you are manufacturing and using all kind of ingredients to make the feed.
Yeah. So yeah, coming to the most important factor is the protein availability. So as we have in India, we have a multiple source of protein, like as we were discussing, rapeseed meal is there. We have a maize gluten meal and groundnut cake. So that way in India, availability is there, whether it is in the form of soya meal as a protein product or in the form of other products. So other products have a different challenge in terms of their nutrition availability and in terms of the aflatoxin level issues, which we face broadly in the groundnut DOC and the maize gluten meal. So as such, India is self-sufficient. I don't see there is a problem in matching the requirement of the industry right now. But yeah, but being it's a global economy and then the people, industry people of like soya industry people, they have a freedom to export. That will anyway happen, because if the government is allowing the export and they find a commercial parity, they will definitely do the exports. Nobody can stop it. So that way, the economy should be open to to procure anything from the outside the world. So it is good for the industry, because ultimately everybody should work on efficiency and the cost saving. So if they are getting a parity to export, let them export. We are getting a parity to import, we should import. So that kind of openness government should provide to us and to all the industry player. Like with the last year decision was taken very late, and being as highlighted by Dr. Victor Suresh already, globally we are facing a lot of vessel crisis, ships availability, schedules and all that. So those things has to be allowed in a structured manner, so as an industry we can meet our requirement. Coming on to the grain side, yeah, as now the feed industry started using multiple grains, availability is there, and depending on the year, the production is low, high, it varies. Yeah, the last year, yeah, the India exported almost close to 3 million ton of maize, which led to that kind of a price rally. So that way the government should, because government is when taking care of our farmers in terms of exporting the grains and all, then they should take care of the industry also. When there is a need, they need to be allowed to be imported also.
Yeah, so I asked this question in context of, if you see actually few years back, if I'm not mistaken, when I had just started my career, there used to be this discussion, that China is the black box. Sometimes they turn exporters, sometimes they turn importers. And anytime they turn exporter or importer, they end up swinging the market either way. And over a period of time, now they have consistently turned importers. So it's that phase that probably India is also going through. And I would like to know that, for say next 5 years, 6 years down the line, we may turn net importer in case of feed requirement. It is from that angle that I was asking the question. You have any view on that, Akhilji? We can move to others.
Yeah. So considering the production growth, so India is that way self-sufficient, and if it is a parity is there, so in India there is no problem in terms of availability as such. So in next 5 years also, I don't see any need in terms of importing. But yeah, depending on the kind of parity they get in terms of pricing,
Yeah, sure.
so then there is a challenge in the demand, supply here.
Great. Dr. Victor, you want to go for this?
Yeah, I think, first of all, our biggest need is in protein, because aqua feeds are usually protein rich. So definitely protein is the one in which, we are looking at importing. So here, the one other issue that I want to highlight is the seasonality. Aquaculture is more or less a seasonal business. It's during the cooler months of November to March, the production actually goes down significantly. And so the peak time is really the summertime. I would say between May and August, we have the highest level of consumption when the fish are eating more, the shrimp are eating more. You need a lot of feed. Now, it just when you look at the ingredient situation, if you look at the soybean meal as it comes into the harvest, is when we actually go into the low season. And then when the soy meal is actually in demand is when we have the highest, demand for the soybean meal. And the same thing with fish meal also, because the fishing happens, they have the fishing ban, and then the monsoon is there, and then they start fishing from September, and then we actually go down into a slowdown. And then when our peak demand is there in May, that's when we're just about to start the fishing bans and the monsoon starting on the west coast, and then things shut down or slow down. So there is a problem in managing the seasonality, and I think aquafeed manufacturers more than anyone need to really plan for this seasonal disruption. And the other fact is that things like fish meal, we also need to look at the sustainability of it. How much of a fish can we produce? How much of a fish can we utilize? Say, for example, our requirement is something like 2.5 lakh tons, of fish meal. To produce 2.5 lakhs of fish meal, you need almost 8 to 9 lakh tons of fish, because you're taking the fish and then you're reducing the moisture. And fish is 70% moisture, fish meal is 10% moisture. So there is a reduction that happens. And during this reduction, so you need a very high amount of fish that is being used to produce the fish meal. So whether it is sustainable, we are seeing cases in which the traditional West Coast fisheries are being impacted because of that. There is a harvest that is not sustainable. So it's not a good idea. So again, there is a need for government to recognize this and allow for import of fish meal. In fact, the government of India should encourage the import of fish meal rather than, and the other side is the certification, because when you're exporting to the Western markets, they definitely ask for a lot of certification requirements. And these certification requirements state that, if you don't comply today, they set you a time frame. They say that, okay, by 2025, you should be compliant with this. And what does that mean? That, you need to bring your fish meal from a fisheries that is certified to be sustainable. And so there is a lot of that. And then the government just increased the taxes on the import taxes on the fish meal. It was not really necessary. They should encourage and this whole sanitary import permit regime that they have, and the other protein that we are talking about is the poultry meal. Even though poultry meal is now becoming available in India, we cannot use it in the shrimp feed because of the antibiotic problem. So when we are exporting shrimp, we need to be sure that it doesn't have any antibiotics. And when you're using a poultry meal, which has been given antibiotics, and there will be residues of it, and then that gets into the feed and then go to the shrimp, and then eventually it becomes a problem. So we cannot do that. And again, there are certain countries, where this is more controlled, and then the poultry byproduct meal that's produced, can be a good source of protein, and it should be allowed to be imported. So I think putting too many restrictions and blockades on the bringing of raw materials is only going to harm us on the long term. So again, on the soybean, I think we are all on the same boat. Whether you are poultry or aqua, we're all in the same boat, and we need to do the same thing. Again, a government should this time what happened was the government allowed it too late, and then now nobody is happy because of that situation. What they need to do is to allow the soybean meal based on the situation and on a timely basis. If the problem happens in March, then you open in March. Then maybe you shut it down in 3 months before the local harvest comes in, or right when the local harvest comes in, you just shut it down. That would be the best way, rather than waiting too long and to take a decision on it. This is how we have been impacted. I mean, we have been majorly impacted. When the soybean meal prices were the record high, 14 rupees a kilo, we had it, and we feed manufacturers couldn't raise the price that much, because like Dr. Suyash pointed out, we also have the situation where farmers were not getting the money, especially in the case of fish. the fish prices were low. So how could feed manufacturers charge the fish farmers, more? Even the shrimp farmers, even though the situation was good this year, shrimp farmers were also not making that much money. So couldn't raise the price, and as much as it costed the feed manufacturer. So things like that happen. So as I think we need the government to be responsive to whatever is happening and then take quick action.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
Thanks. No, Suyash, I think we are coming close to our VANA discussion. After you say, I'll conclude in a couple of minutes. So please.
Yeah, just these majority of things already Akhil and Dr. Suresh has mentioned about it. I would like to say that we need to look it into totality. If we need to look at that what the market is existing, like from dairy sector, if I am saying that recently government data says 204 million metric ton production, and IFCN is predicting 225 million metric ton of production of milk. And the statistics which is available to us about the organized industries cattle feed production is somewhere between 14 million metric ton to 16 million metric ton, which is not tallying to the reality, because the requirement what we are producing and what we are feeding. So it means there is a big chunk which is available for the raw material feeding to the animal, the raw material which is being handled by traders. And we need to understand that your basic question is whether India will turn into importer. I believe so, that the way our food means consumption and quality food consumption post-COVID era is increasing, so then there will be certainly a section of consumer which would like to look into the traceability of the product which they are consuming. And the clear traceability goes to the feed and raw materials. So undoubtedly, I completely agree with Akhil's point of view that material is available, raw material we are self-sufficient, but quality is again questionable. If recent FSSAI push you can see specifically in dairy feed industry to control the aflatoxin levels which are coming into milk. So I believe that at this moment we are self-sufficient. As per IFCN data, by 2025, India may start dairy import. Already certain value-added products India is importing, but at the same time, we are nearing to the deficit. So there will be by 2025 or max to the 2030, looking at our population growth, imports will happen. And what Akhil and Dr. Suresh was mentioning, that if choice is given, and you need to be competitive with the global countries. Now economy is integrating, world is opening up. So our competition is not within the country, but outside country also. In another decade, there could have been a situation that Indian poultry farmers or dairy farmer or aqua farmer will be competing with the global farmers. So in that particular scenario, certainly we need to look into. And in my opinion, personal opinion, we may turn into importer. What you are saying about China, the same situation can arrive to India also. So only the thing, my message could have been that increase quality of the feed which is being produced, because it is directly linked with the food. And if given the choice by the consumer will opt for the best product, whether it is locally manufactured or it is being imported.
Great. I think we've had fortunately diversified view also. Otherwise, I was like writing my notes thinking, will I be saying that, the industry feels that there may not be need to import. But thanks to Suyash, we have a different point of view also, who believes that, within 5 years time, in fact, 25 is just 3 years down the line. We could be, and the fact remains that, a good product, good quality product, there will always be a demand and that premium that the industry is willing to pay for it. So it's been quite a fruitful discussion. I'm just hoping that our audience also finds it that, it was a very rich discussion that we had, cross sectors. It is very useful to, anticipate and understand the demands and, fill in the gaps that were, lying there. I just realized that, in this whole thing, I did not introduce myself. So I think I'll end the discussion by introducing myself. I have been commodity research for last almost 25 years. And I have tracked almost all commodities, including the oilseeds, grains, cotton, castor, sugar, etc. Currently, I'm working with Samunnati, and Samunnati, I'm heading the research department. Samunnati is basically India's largest agri-tech enterprise, and its mission to create an open agri network and unlock the $1 trillion plus potential of Indian agriculture, but with the small holder farmer at the center of it. So we have we are into agri finance, we are into agri commerce business, as well as we are into farmer network, the FPO based farmer network. And I do research for Samunnati, agri-based research. We do our own supply estimates, we do our own consumption estimates, which may or may not be in line with what the government is giving or what the industry-specific associations are giving. We believe that both of them have reason to give the number that they give, and that is why it is required that an independent body is also coming out with that number. And we've recently conducted our soybean crop survey. So as a vote of thanks to each of you, I would like to share my soybean numbers with you, so that you'll probably have something to take home also. I'm sharing my screen. I hope it's visible.
It's visible.
This report, of course, we are going to release today. As you can see, the acreage was almost unchanged over last year. And that's because, at 120 lakh hectare also, we were at record. So at 121, we've actually improved on our acreage. But as you can see, last year's base was very low for yields. And that's why there is a jump in yield also. Yield improvement is also not uniform across the place because of the weather vagaries. Rajasthan, Karnataka is expected to have lower yields, including Telangana. But Madhya Pradesh and Maharashtra is going to see good yields. This is the third year in a row that Maharashtra is emerging as the largest soybean producing state. Though in acreage terms, it's not the largest, but because of the yields, it has emerged as the largest producer. And our initial estimate is that India is likely to produce close to 110 lakh metric ton of soybean, which will be higher than last year, and which will actually increase the availability, and the balance sheet will be loose year on year. This is the soybean balance sheet, which is expected to be it was put very aptly by all of you, that when the need emerges, import will happen and exports will also happen. I think this year is going to be one such year whereby we will not only import meal, but we'll also end up exporting meal because of the climate and the freight and the value chain crisis that the world is going through. India belongs to a part of the world which is largely consumer, and we'll have that geographical advantage, and that's why we believe that eventually the exports will also materialize. But all in all, we'll have a loose balance sheet compared to last year. But historically speaking, this is also in last few years, 5-6 years, we've seen as large carry forward as 2 million tons. So in that context, if we end up with 1 million ton, it is relatively smaller carry forward. But that will also depend on how the export and import materialize. So with that, I would like to, thank you all. I'll stop my share, and for your valuable inputs, your time, and I hope to stay connected. I think we need to refine more on these ideas and capture the consumption region wise, commodity wise, and I definitely want to do this. So in that my journey, I will get in touch with each of you from time to time, and I hope we'll kind of get better clarity over a period of time. Thank you. I hope my audience who's listening to this has also had the enriching experience that